Long ago, in a galaxy far away, the Ebionites' holy writings were hidden by God in caves to protect the truth that will set you free. The followers of Jesus would recover them and expose the enemy. Okay, so now we're going to get into the trial by the Ebionites that we know of from the records that were allowed to survive, and we'll get into Dead Sea Scrolls after these charges are reviewed. So early church historians preserved the Ebionite charge against Paul even while trying to dishonor the Ebionites. This is the exact quote from Epiphanius in the 300s. They declare that he, Paul, was a Greek. He went up to Jerusalem, they say, and when he had spent some time there, he was seized with a passion to marry the daughter of the priest. For this reason he became a proselyte and was circumcised. Then, when he failed to get the girl, he flew into a rage and wrote against circumcision and against the Sabbath and the law. That's in Epiphanius, the Panarian 30.16.6-9. Therefore, the Ebionites thus say Paul was not a Jew, but the son of two Gentile parents. He became circumcised as an adult when he fell in love with the daughter of a priest. All right? How plausible is this charge against Paul? So at first you're going to go, this sounds crazy, until you dig in a little deeper. And several people have been trying to remind me, that there's evidence that Paul was a relative of Herod, and this is something that Eisenman brought out by virtue of certain salutations that Paul was making to people and so on. Anyway, so let's just see how that works out. There is independent evidence to corroborate the Ebionite charge that Paul was not a Jew in the strict Jewish sense. It appears he was an Herodian Jew, which to true Jews is not a true Jew at all. Herod and his family tried to tell Jews he was Jewish, but true Jews did not accept Herod's claims. The Herodian lineage had foreign elements in it. Herod the Great was a Roman collaborator ruling Judea as king prior to Jesus. He was put into power by the Romans, lending him troops to subjugate Judea. One of his sons, Herod Antipas, succeeds him in the time of Christ to rule part of his kingdom. Saul Paul in Romans 16:11 greets Herodian, my kinsman, i.e. my relative, which is a name that a member of the Herodian family would use. So in other words, by calling this person Herodian, my kinsman, he is literally admitting that he's part of the family of Herod, because this is how they would refer to themselves. The Herodian, they'd all have different names to take advantage of the fact that they're of the family of Herod. Josephus, who as far as we know was not a Christian, mentions a Saulus in his work, The Antiquities of the Jews. In Book 20, Chapter 9, Josephus says Saulus is a member of the family of the successor Herod Antipas. Josephus says this Saulus sided with the high priest in resisting the tumult by lower order priests over temple funds going to the high priest. Josephus records this Saulus's activity was after Jesus' movement had already begun, but before we know independently that Paul joined it. This is in Antiquities 29.4. This therefore puts the Saulus of Josephus in precisely the chronological position of Saul Paul prior to his road to Damascus experience. Further, the Saulus of Josephus and the Saul of Acts both are collaborators of the high priest, an appointee of Herod. So when Josephus says Saulus, so by the way, Tovia Singer always says that Paul could not have collaborated with the high priest. That's a false story, because the Sadducees usually held the office of the high priest, and they didn't get along with Pharisees, and Paul was saying he was a Pharisee. So two things we need to realize, okay, I'll just deal with one issue, is here we find out that this high priest was appointed by Herod, and it appears that Paul is related to the family of Herod, because his kinsman is Herodian, okay? So if he's related to Herod, it wouldn't surprise us that he could make the high priest, a Sadducee, accept him even if he were a Pharisee. So Tovia Singer didn't maybe know these details, so in light of that, I would suggest if he sees this video, he can revise his opinion. Yes, Paul could be serving the high priest, even though he is not a Sadducee himself, and maybe even he is a Pharisee. All right, so let's continue. Further, Saulus of Josephus and Saul of Acts both are collaborators of the high priest, an appointee of Herod. So when Josephus says Saulus was of the family of Herod, this is direct evidence that Saul Paul was of the family of Herod. The most important fact is that Paul says he has Roman citizenship from birth. I have been born a Roman citizen, Acts 22, verse 28. You would carry around proof on a small libellus. Paul's claim was accepted in Acts. It has several implications. First, Roman citizenship was an honor from Rome, which in the Judean region primarily only could be enjoyed by members of Herod's family or his closest allies. The list of Roman citizens was kept in Caesar's office in Rome. It was not a very long list. Most native-born Italians did not enjoy this privilege. In outlying provinces like Judea, it was dispensed to military allies and their families to give them special protection from Roman occupation forces. You cannot torture or beat a Roman citizen. Second, Roman citizenship from birth means Saul had to be given a Roman name from birth. It turns out that Paul is a Roman name, Paulus. How did Paul... Now, we also in a separate video have this discussion that Paulus is a contraction of the full name, which is Pauxililis. So it was a name, is a cute name you'd give your kid. Oh, he's the least, so we'll name him the least. Pauxililis meant the least. How did Paul happen to have a Roman birth name if he was truly Jewish? It cannot happen. A true Jewish family would not give their child a Roman name or even accept Roman citizenship from birth. This would represent defilement. Thus, Paul had to be from birth a non-Jew. However, his parents also named him Saul, which is a Jewish name. Thus, his parents aspired to be Jewish. This fits perfectly the Herodians. They would be non-Jews and Roman citizens, but they would aspire to be Jewish. Thus, in the Judea of that era, only Herodians would have a child with both a Roman and Hebrew name, Paul Saul, who would have Roman citizenship from birth, and who would greet a kinsman, i.e. a relative named Herodian. That's Romans 16, verse 11. It thus is not a coincidence that Saul in Acts is a collaborator of the high priest appointed by Herod, nor is it insignificant that Saulus and Josephus is likewise a collaborator of the high priest in precisely the time frame of Saul Paul prior to becoming a Christian. This then leads us to the unequivocal statement of Josephus that Saulus is a member of the royal family of Herod Antipas. In fact, Paul, being an Herodian Jew, would explain the presence of Herod's foster brother as a member of the Christian church at Antioch. After Paul's Damascus road experience, he went to Arabia for 14 years. Galatians 1, verse 17 to chapter 2, verse 1. At the end of that time, Paul emerges as a delegate from the Antioch church to go to Jerusalem for a ruling on circumcision. Acts 14, verse 26, chapter 15, verse 2. So who previously belonged to this church at Antioch? And there were certain in Antioch in the assembly there, prophets and teachers. Manaen also, Herod the Tetrarch's foster brother, and Saul, Acts 13:1. And I'm going to pause there because somebody asked me about that this week, and there was something interesting in that passage I didn't know before. Hold on. All right. Now, there's significant evidence right here in Acts 13:1 that Saul, he's also known as Saul, he was raised with Herod the Tetrarch as a boyhood friend. But you can't see it because your translators did change the meaning of it by adding punctuation that is not present in Greek. And I'm going to show you what they did. I'm going to read it straight through first. If you didn't see the parentheses, you'll get the meaning. If you just put those out of your mind, just even as I read it, you'd see it. There were also in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. Now, if you didn't see the parentheses, see, I've actually crossed them out, so maybe you can't see them. This is in the Geneva Bible, and every Bible that includes this portion, this parenthetical portion, it's not a parenthetical. It's no parentheses. There's no punctuation in Greek. Okay? So this is something that you would then just simply say, okay, it means that Manaen was brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. That's what it means. If you had intended it to mean something like Saul who wasn't brought up with that, you just would have listed Saul earlier. Listen to how it sounds if you move it earlier. There were also in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Saul, okay, right? And Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch. So you'd have to move Saul near Lucius of Cyrene, or actually put him in the series. Simeon called Niger, then no, there is no comma in Greek. Then Lucius of Cyrene and Saul. Then say, and Manaen, which had been brought up with the Herod the Tetrarch, and you wouldn't have Saul at the end. You wouldn't do that because it would. Your modifiers are pointing at Saul as being a boyhood friend with Manaen and Herod the Tetrarch. Herod the Tetrarch, by the way, is the one who killed John the Baptist. So, but it really shouldn't surprise us that Saul had a boyhood friend of Herod the Tetrarch, because it seems to be he's getting an influential post with the Sadducean high priest, who normally wouldn't even deal or talk to a Pharisee, but Herod appointed the Sadducee high priest. And so if Herod says, hey, my boyhood friend Saul, I want him to be helping you go after the Christians, then this high priest would hire him. And again, remember, like Tovia Singer says, it's impossible. It's impossible that he was serving the high priest, because Paul is a Pharisee, and the Pharisees don't get along with Sadducees. But the difference, the game changer, is that it's well explained by this verse here, that if this is true, that his boyhood friend is Herod the Tetrarch, the killer of John the Baptist, then this is and the appointer of the high priest, this is the guy who can get Paul that post to be a persecutor of Christians underneath the high priest. So Paul is not lying about that, or at least it's more credible than it sounds when you consider this verse as explaining that Paul is actually a boyhood friend of Herod the Tetrarch. And actually, at first I looked at this and I you know what it is? You look at it and someone's trying to tell me, Doug, this means and the guy wrote me and he said in Greek, and that should have clued me in right away. In Greek, he said it has no modifications, and what he should have said is there's no punctuation, and that would clue me in, and I didn't think about it. We get brainwashed by our translations that are deliberately altered to make us think there's something on the page that isn't there, and there are no parentheses in Greek. And it would be, you'd have to know what the modifier is, and the modifier was the word for which, and that controls it's that the two words coming later are both subject to the clause, and therefore both Herod the Tetrarch and Saul are the boyhood friends of Manaen. See? Anyway, so this is just another proof that Herod the Tetrarch had some connection to Saul that could be explained by a family relationship, and the fact that they are boyhood friends could be because their families are related. You know how you play with your cousins and relatives? Well, that would make perfect sense why he's a boyhood friend of Herod the Tetrarch and Manaen. Okay, so let's just wrap this up here. So we see there is some evidence. Acts 22:28, Paul says he's had Roman citizenship from birth in the Judean region under Herodian control. Now, another reason he could have it is he says he was born in Tarsus, which there was a special deal with Mark Antony that whoever was born there would have automatic Roman citizenship, and that's the explanation there for why he had Roman citizenship from birth. So it could be it's just a coincidence that he's has Roman citizenship, and that's not a evidence towards proving that he is of the family of Herod or relative, or that he's being favored by Herod. But there is a lot of Herod connections where he's at church at Antioch. There's a Herodian childhood friend. He's working with the Sadducees high priest, which wouldn't make sense, except that Sadducee priest was appointed by Herod. Paul, greets a relative, Herodian, and so on. So there are, and the Saul Paul is claimed by Josephus is the most direct. If you can conclude that Saulus there is really talking about Paul, and it's a similar person working kind of as an aggressive agitator on behalf of the high priest. So, again, you have more evidence there. So, and just for purposes of the Benjamite wolf that we have here, is if his grandparents are of the tribe of Benjamin, he could still make the claim he is a member of the tribe of Benjamin, even though his father and his mother don't qualify as full Jews for whatever reason. Okay. So therefore, the available evidence strongly vindicates the investigation by the Ebionites. The Ebionites could, in a strict investigation, prove that Paul did not have Jewish parents according to the rabbinic definition. Thus, while the Ebionites' doctrines made them want to exclude Paul because of his position on the law, this did not apparently bias the result. It appears their claims on Paul's background are so substantial that we could conclude Paul was not a true Jew even without knowing the Ebionite claim on Paul's background. The significance of trusting the Ebionite charge, however, is this means they were proving Paul to be untruthful. Paul claimed he was born a Jew and circumcised on the 8th day, Philippians 3, verse 5. This fits right in with Revelation 2:2, where the false claimant to apostleship was proven a liar at Ephesus. It also fits the parallel statement by Jesus about those who lie and say they are Jews but are not. That's in Revelation 3:9. Most important, the Ebionite charge has the characteristic of evidence one might bring up at a trial. It has a judicial ring to it. There is nothing polemical about it. No doctrines are involved. The charge purports to be the result of someone trying to find out more about Paul's background. Thus, it appears the Ebionites were involved in finding evidence to bring up at trial regarding Paul. So we're going to take a look at some evidence that would probably have been introduced to the trial that we can see in the Clementine Homilies. So give me a break, and we're going to be back in a second. Ciao. Okay, so we're going to look at Homily 17, and we're going to see that Peter is talking in a trial of Paul, and even though Rufinus went over this, and he changed the word Paul or enemy or some other synonym for Paul at that time, and he changed it into Simon Magus, everybody knows that's not who this is about. It's so blatantly about Paul that you can't deny that, and everybody agrees. So let me just give that to you. Alexander Roberts writes in the Ante-Nicene Fathers, this passage has therefore been regarded as a covert attack upon the Apostle Paul, the Homily 17. Likewise, Robert Griffin-Jones, a pro-Pauline scholar, admits Paul is the true adversary of this passage. Paul is demonized in a fictional dispute, it's not fictional, in the Clementine Homilies in which Peter trounces him. Bart Ehrman, a very reputable scholar, concurs in that this Homily 17, that the word Simon Magus, in fact, is a cipher or code word for none other than Paul himself, and it was a code word created by Rufinus, not original. You can decide for yourself. So here it is, and I'm just going to caution that he refers to Paul having a vision of Jesus, and that's partly true. Not his Damascus Road experience, but he claimed a vision of Jesus in an ecclesia in Acts 22, and then in 2 Corinthians 12, he claims he gets all his revelations through visions up when he goes into the third heaven, and that's where Jesus speaks that's where he gets revelations from Jesus, but he's then told it's unlawful for him to ever repeat anything that Jesus says in the third heaven. So it's true to that extent. So most of Paul's encounters with his Jesus are always in visions, but except the first time on the road to Damascus, when Paul makes it very clear that was a physical appearance. Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to just read it from beginning to end so you can just get the feel for it. And as you're hearing it, you will hear wisdom, incredible wisdom, and critique of Paul that is very apropos even today. If then our Jesus appeared to you in a vision, made himself known to you, and spoke to you, it was as one who was enraged with an adversary. By the way, if you go back and look at Acts 9, there is nothing positive about Jesus towards Paul in that Acts 9 account. It's just simply, he says, you're persecuting me. Paul responds, and Paul's Jesus says, go into town and you'll learn everything you need to know. Nothing positive. Didn't say anything like you're going to be an apostle to the Gentiles. Never called him an apostle. Just a very brusque response. Okay. It was as one who was enraged with an adversary. And this is the reason why it was through visions and dreams or through revelations that were from without that he spoke to you. But can anyone be rendered fit for instruction through apparitions? And if you will say, it is possible, then I ask, why did our teacher abide in discourse a whole year to those who were awake? And how are we to believe your word when you tell us that he appeared to you? And how did he appear to you? When you entertain opinions contrary to his teaching. But if you were seen and taught by him and became his apostle for a single hour, proclaim his utterances, interpret his sayings, love his apostles, contend not with me who companied with him. For in direct opposition to me, who am a firm rock, the foundation of the church, you now stand. If you were not opposed to me, you would not accuse me and revile the truth proclaimed by me, in order that I may not be believed when I state what I myself have heard with my own ears from the Lord, as if I were evidently a person that was condemned and in bad repute. Paul says he openly condemned Peter in an encounter with the Galatians when he was not eating with them because of the fact that they were eating meat sacrificed to idols, is how Peter would have explained it, and does explain it elsewhere in the homilies why he wouldn't do it. And Paul's trying to say you're a hypocrite, you know. So he had already condemned Peter to his face, and this is kind of like Peter's get back and tell him, you're condemning me. All right. Anyway, but if you say that I am condemned, you bring an accusation against God, who revealed the Christ to me, and you inveigh against him who pronounced me blessed on account of the revelation. Right? I mean, Jesus said to him, this revelation that you have, that Jesus is, this is Jesus talking to Peter, that I am the Christ, the Son of God, this is what was revealed to you by my Father in heaven. So this is what Peter is saying, is he was given a prophetic word, and Jesus confirmed it. And that's puts Peter on a level way higher than Paul, because God, Yahweh, has spoken directly to Peter in that instance. That's what Jesus said. And Paul doesn't have any of that, not an ounce of it. So that's what he's telling him. But if indeed you really wish to work in the cause of truth, learn first of all from us what we have learned from him. And becoming a disciple of the truth, become a fellow worker with us. See, Paul says, I didn't want to know anything from them. And in fact, he boasts to the Galatians, they have imparted nothing to me. And he says that in 47 AD, he had come along to claim he was a Christian in 34 or 35 AD. 12 years later, he's proud to say, I've received nothing from them, and everything I have learned has been by revelation directly with the Lord Jesus Christ up in heaven, in this third heaven, as he explains in 2 Corinthians 12. So this is a powerful passage from Peter. So I'm going to pause it right here, and I'm going to see if there's anything else I want to get out for this particular page. Okay, we're going to break at this point, and we're going to ask you to look for episode number 3 of this series, and I hope you're enjoying and getting edified and educated at the same time, and we'll hope to see you on the other side in episode 3.